glow of my monitor was the only light in my basement apartment, casting long, distorted shadows of my energy drink cans across the wall. It was 3 a.m., my usual witching hour, and I was deep down the rabbit hole of the dark web. Most people see the dark web as a den of illicit activity, and they're not wrong, but for me, it was an adrenaline rush, a digital treasure hunt for the forbidden, the grotesque, the truly messed up corners of the internet. I wasn't looking for anything specific tonight, just browse the forums, reveling in the anonymity and the unsettling hum of illicit information passing around. I'd been at it for years, ever since I stumbled upon a leaked government document in a hidden forum and felt that cold, thrilling shiver of knowing something I shouldn't. It started as a thrill, then an addiction. The darker the better. I'd seen it all, or so I thought. Red rooms, hitman solicitations, drug markets, child exploitation forums. I quickly learned to steer clear of anything that would genuinely implicate me or that crossed my moral lines too deeply. I was a voyeur, not a participant. My moral lines were admittedly a bit blurry after all this time, but I still had them. I drew the line at real, tangible harm. My curiosity was a beast, but it wasn't a monster. Yet, tonight though, was different. I was on a particularly obscure forum, one dedicated to cryptic rituals and occult digital artifacts. Usually, these were just role-playing forums or places for wannabe edgy teens to share bad fan fiction. But this one had a different feel. The posts were sparse, the language almost liturgical in its formality, and the usernames were just strings of numbers. No avatars, no signatures, just pure, unadulterated text. And the links, oh the links, they weren't your typical .onion addresses. They were long, complex strings of characters that looked almost like corrupted data, mixed with what seemed to be Latin phrases. I scrolled, sipping my lukewarm energy drink, feeling that familiar blend of boredom and anticipation. Most of the links led to dead ends or to pages of indecipherable code. But then I saw it. A thread titled, "The Eye of Algol." Beneath it, a single link, unlike any I'd seen. It was short for once, just 8 characters. 273LR9A4onion. But what caught my attention was the description in brackets next to it. Do not enter. It watches. A shiver, not of fear, but of pure excitement, traced its way down my spine. This was it. This was the kind of thing I lived for. A challenge, a warning, a promise of something truly unsettling. My fingers hovered over the link, a smile playing on my lips. Don't enter, huh? I muttered to the empty room. We'll see about that. I clicked. The screen didn't just load, it transformed. The browser window dissolved, replaced by a full screen display. No address bar, no tabs, no minimize or close buttons. Just a black screen, and in the center, a single, pulsating red dot. It wasn't just a pixel. It seemed to have depth, to almost breathe. It felt alive. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't a web page. This was something else entirely. The red dot pulsed, slowly at first, then faster and faster until it was a blinding, rhythmic throb that seemed to echo in my very skull. A low hum started, vibrating through my headphones, growing in intensity until it felt like my teeth were rattling. Then images. They flashed across the screen too fast to properly register, disjointed, fragmented, like a nightmare caught in a strobe light. Faces contorted in agony, landscapes that shifted and bled into one another. Symbols I'd never seen, arcane and unsettling, burning themselves into my retina before vanishing. The red dot remained, a malevolent eye at the center of the storm. I tried to close the window. My mouse wouldn't respond. I tried Alt+4, Ctrl+Alt+Delete. Nothing. My keyboard was dead. I was trapped, locked into this experience. Panic, real, unadulterated panic, began to set in. This wasn't just some edgy website. This was something that had taken control. The images slowed, becoming clearer, but no less horrifying. They weren't just pictures, they were videos. Short, grainy clips like old found footage. A hand reaching out from a dark corner, slender and impossibly long, with nails like talons. A figure, barely visible in the gloom, moving with a jerky, unnatural grace. The sound grew louder, not just a hum, but a whisper, a low, guttural murmur that seemed to coil around my brain, trying to pry open the most hidden parts of my mind. And the red dot, it wasn't just a dot anymore. It was forming, slowly, subtly. The edges began to ripple, to extend. It was taking the shape of an eye, a single, lidless eye, blood red, with a pupil that seemed to swirl with unfathomable depths. It watched me. I felt it. A cold, penetrating gaze that burrowed directly into my soul. It felt like it was dissecting me, peeling back layers of my consciousness, sifting through my memories, my fears, my deepest, darkest secrets. My breath hitched in my throat. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, trickling down my temples. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. My mouth was dry, my throat constricted. This wasn't digital. This felt physical. The air in my room grew heavy, stagnant, as if all the oxygen was being sucked out. A faint, metallic smell, like old blood, began to permeate the air. The images on the screen stopped. The hum ceased. Only the eye remained, burning crimson in the darkness. And then, a sound, not through my headphones, but from the speakers of my computer. A voice. It was deep, resonating, and utterly inhuman. It wasn't speaking in words, not in any language I knew. It was a cacophony of clicks, hisses, and guttural growls, yet somehow, I understood. It was communicating directly with my mind. It spoke of despair, of ancient entities that lurked in the spaces between realities, of things that fed on fear, on regret, on the gnawing emptiness of the human soul. It showed me my own life, not as a coherent narrative, but as a series of isolated moments of weakness, of failure, of shame. My broken relationships, my professional setbacks, the quiet moments of self-loathing I thought were buried deep. It wasn't just showing them, it was magnifying them, making them feel raw and immediate, twisting the knife in every wound. Then it shifted. It showed me things I couldn't have known. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who always offered me cookies. It showed her in the quiet hours of the night, weeping inconsolably over a faded photograph. My estranged brother, a man I hadn't spoken to in years. It showed him in a desperate, lonely struggle with addiction, something he had always hidden. The mundane turned macabre, the familiar twisted into the grotesque. It was showing me the hidden suffering of everyone I knew, everyone I had ever casually interacted with. It was tearing down the veil, revealing the festering wounds beneath the surface of everyday life. The eye pulsed faster, its red glow intensifying, casting a crimson stain on my walls. The voice grew louder, more insistent, pressing against the inside of my skull. It wasn't just showing me these things. It was blaming me, accusing me, for my indifference, for my self-absorption, for every fleeting moment of negativity I had ever harbored towards another human being. It was the collective weight of human suffering, magnified and funneled directly into my mind. I could feel a pressure building behind my eyes, a searing pain that threatened to burst them from their sockets. My nose began to bleed, a warm trickle down my upper lip. I was shaking uncontrollably, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. My vision was blurring at the edges, the room spinning around me. And then a new image appeared within the eye itself, my own reflection. But it wasn't just my face. It was distorted, stretched, the features subtly wrong, subtly other. My eyes were wide and bloodshot, my mouth agape in a silent scream. And in the background, just barely visible, a shadowy figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, with those same long, slender limbs I had seen in the flickering videos. It was standing directly behind me, in my reflection, in my room. My blood ran cold. I could feel a presence behind me, a cold breath on my neck, even though there was nothing there. Or was there? My mind was fracturing, reality bending and twisting. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately trying to break the connection, to force myself awake from this nightmare. When I opened them again, the eye was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer just red. Thin black veins were beginning to spiderweb across its surface, like cracked porcelain. And in the center of the pupil, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of recognition? No, more like hunger. The voice in my head changed too. It stopped with the accusations. It began to offer. Offers of knowledge, of power, of escape from the mundane, the miserable, the truly human condition. It showed me visions of a world where I could see beyond the superficial, where I could manipulate events, where I could be free from the anxieties that plagued me. It was tempting, horrifyingly tempting. It knew my desires, my secret yearnings, and it was twisting them into a perverse allure. It was whispering about how easy it would be to shed the weight of my humanity, to become something more. But the price was clear, though unspoken. It was my soul, my identity, to become a vessel, a conduit for this ancient, malevolent force, to lose myself in its vast, terrifying consciousness. I felt a faint flicker of resistance, a last, desperate gasp of my rational mind. This was evil, pure, unadulterated evil. Everything I had sought on the dark web, every thrill, every transgression, every line I had blurred, it had led me here, to this choice. The eye pulsed, the black veins growing thicker, the red more vibrant, more hungry. The shadowy figure in my reflection seemed to lean closer, its form becoming slightly clearer, its head tilting as if in anticipation. I could almost hear it breathing, a faint rasping sound. Just as I felt myself weakening, just as the whispers of power began to sound almost sweet, a sudden, blinding flash of light erupted from my window. It was the pre-dawn glow, the first tentative rays of the sun piercing through the gaps in my cheap blackout curtains. The eye on the screen flickered. The red intensified, then dimmed. The black veins seemed to retract, to shrink back into the depths. The shadowy figure in my reflection recoiled, its form dissolving, becoming indistinct. The voice in my head fractured, became a chaotic jumble of sounds, then faded into a low, echoing whisper. The pressure in my head eased. The metallic smell dissipated. My nosebleed stopped. My body was still trembling, but the violent spasms had subsided. Slowly, Agonizingly, the full screen display began to pixelate, to tear apart like old paper. The red eye dissolved into static, then the black screen, then finally, my desktop reappeared. My browser window was gone. My computer was quiet. The hum was gone. The whispers were gone. I slumped back in my chair, gasping for air, my heart still hammering against my ribs. My whole body was drenched in sweat, my clothes clinging uncomfortably to my skin. I felt utterly drained, as if every ounce of energy had been siphoned out of me. I stared at my desktop, at the familiar icons, the mundane wallpaper. It looked different, sharper, more real, and yet, somehow, less substantial. As if I had crossed a threshold, and now the world on this side was just a thin veneer over something infinitely more vast and terrifying. I slowly reached for my mouse. It worked. My keyboard was responsive. Everything was back to normal, but I wasn't. I spent the next few days in a haze. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe. Every mundane sound in my apartment building seemed to hold a hidden meaning, a whisper from the void. I kept seeing the red eye in the periphery of my vision, its malevolent gaze burning into my mind. I kept hearing the echoes of that voice, those unholy offers, those terrifying truths about the suffering of others. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, a bad trip from too much caffeine and too little sleep. But the memories were too vivid, too real. The cold breath on my neck, the metallic smell, the distinct feeling of being watched, dissected. I deleted all my dark web tools, purged my browser history, even reformatted my hard drive. I wanted to scrub every trace of that night from my life, from my computer, from my very being. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was useless. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen. Some links, once clicked, can never be unclicked. It's been months now. I've stopped browse the dark web. The thrill is gone, replaced by a suffocating dread. I still live in that basement apartment, but it feels smaller, colder somehow, less safe. I still see Mrs. Henderson, and I can't look her in the eye without remembering the image of her weeping. I still think of my brother, and the image of his lonely struggle replays in my mind. The world is no longer just the world. It's a place of hidden pain, of unseen suffering, and I'm constantly aware of it, like a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of everything. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the silence is absolute and the darkness is complete, I feel it, that cold presence, that subtle shift in the air. I close my eyes, but it makes no difference. I can feel the gaze, a single, lidless eye, burning blood red in the blackness behind my eyelids. It's watching me, it's waiting, and I know, with a terrible soul-chilling certainty, that it wasn't just a wrong link, it was an invitation. And eventually, one day, I'll feel that familiar, insidious pull, and I'll have to decide if I can resist it, or if I'll finally give in and step through the Eye of Algol into the abyss.